We are now ready with our first session. In our first session, we discussed the future of cricket. There's a significant amount of uncertainty concerning cricket today and the direction that it will take in the future. The game has a delicate balancing act to maintain in terms to keep growing, develop greater inclusiveness, keep fan interest alive, be commercially viable, and be sustainably run, all while facing our impending climate crisis. To discuss this, we invite on stage Mr. K. Jeshwanth, the former captain and head coach of the Karnataka cricket team, and was a part of the team that won the 1995 and 96 Ranji Trophy, and is now a cricketer turned coach. He's head coach and director of Six Cricket Academy. We have Ms. Binda Day, Chief Marketing Officer of the IPL franchise, Kolkata Knight Riders, and Knight Riders Global Franchises, which owns the teams in the Caribbean Premier League, the American T20 Major Cricket League, and the African T20 League. Through remote appearances, we also welcome Ms. Snehal Pradhan, author, journalist, and former Indian cricketer with a career spanning 15 years. After retirement, she used her vision for sport to shine light on women's cricket and has appeared as a live cricket commentator and a studio analyst across men's and women's international, domestic, and franchise cricket. In 2020, she partnered with the Sports Law and Policy Center and published a report on the state of Indian women's cricket titled The Equal Hue Report, and then co-founded the Equal Hue Project that aims to increase awareness and improve the status of women's cricket in India. We have Mr. Tim Wigmore, award-winning journalist for the Daily Telegraph and contributor to ESPN Cricinfo, the New York Times, and The Economist. He writes about all aspects of sport, especially cricket, sport analytics, and business of sport. He's also a highly respected author with his books, Cricket 2.0 and Crickonomics, being named among the Guardian Sports Books of the Year for 2015 and winning the Wisden Book of the Year and Heartaches Cricket Book of the Year in 2020. We have Mr. Sam Taylor, Managing Director of Product, Sales and Strategy at Sports Solutions, Sportradar, based in Melbourne, Victoria. Previously, Mr. Taylor was the CEO of Interact Sport, which was later acquired by Sportradar. Sportradar is the world's leading sports data and technology company with partnerships across a range of leading sporting organizations with a particular depth and expertise in cricket and has supported our symposium since 2018. Our moderator for the panel discussion is Mr. Mihir Vasavda, Assistant Editor and Principal Sports Correspondent at the Indian Express. Mr. Vasavda won the Sports Media Pearl Award for the Best Color Piece at a ceremony held in Abu Dhabi for his piece Being Poor in the Richest Sport, which was published in June 10, 2015, and he's also the host of the podcast Express Sports. Welcome.
This is fine. Am I audible? Yeah, great. Just wanted to check our colleagues on the Zoom. How will they be joining us? All right. All right. So we'll then get underway. All right. They're here. Great. Great. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all very sufficiently caffeinated for I must say it's an extremely exciting lineup of events. So even if you're not caffeinated, I'm sure it'll be stimulating enough the rest of the day for you all. First of all, it's great to be back in person. Nandan and I was just talking 3 years ago, I think it was in Delhi, that we last had this symposium. It was extremely magnificent the entire day. Some things are just not fun done remotely, and a symposium, I guess, is just one of those things where it's better to be there in person. So yeah, it's great to have this over here. And it's also great to see so many people in the colorful jerseys and not those boring black jackets that I'm wearing. I don't get to wear it very often. I'm sure a lot of you do that in day-to-day lives. So that's nice. Also, jerseys is something that I guess we all will closely connect to because second skin for the fans they are. We all like to wear our jerseys. They're part of our lives, especially in cricket. That is slightly going through, I must say, an existential crisis. I don't know if KKR jersey, a Chennai Super Kings jersey, a Bombay Indians jersey matters more to a young fan than India jersey, the men in blue jersey. So that's the future, perhaps, that we'll be looking at. And we have a great set of panelists as they've been introduced to talk about this subject. They're joining us remotely. We have two great guests over here. I won't take a lot of your time anymore, so I'll come straight at you, Binda. I was having a conversation with Parth Jindal, who co-owns the Delhi team, a couple of months ago. And he was talking about this great dilemma I guess a lot of us are going through. Uh, as a cricket fan, he said he was, experiencing this concerning emotion over the direction in which the sport is headed right now, with all the different kind of formats that are coming up. The tests and the ODI slowly kind of getting irrelevant, maybe a strong word, but I guess for the lack of a better word, I guess irrelevant must be used here. At the same time, as a businessman, he was cognizant of the day's requirements. And that kind of left him with very mixed set of emotions. Now, you are involved with the franchisee that's at the center of this change. KKR has been expanding. It has a global footprint now. Do you share the same emotions, or should I just say you are a very hardcore business person in sport, not sentimentally attached right now?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to the session. It's an honor to speak in a panel with such diverse speakers. To answer your question, of course, we've all grown up with cricket. Any Indian can't help but be passionate about the sport. Of course, as a fan, new sports people who are developing, young people who are getting into the sport right now, they will be also influenced a lot with the kind of cricket that they see, and they aspire to be the kind of cricketers they aspire to be. So as a fan, of course, we are in a dilemma because there is a certain love for different format of the sport. But as a business person, we have to be cognizant of the fact that the attention span of the viewers is falling. Short format content from reels to TikToks, second screen viewing, even when any format of the match is going on, even if it's a T20 format. There's hardly any viewer who's focusing full attention onto a match. They are fiddling with the phone, with the second screen viewing, either it's on stats or fantasy gaming, some other format. So you don't have that time anymore where you get the undivided attention. So with the time, to focus on the audience that's watching the game also has to evolve. And at the end of the day, we can't ignore the commerce side of the business too. There are broadcasters, there are advertisers who are putting in their advertisers' money, and they expect a certain return. So there will be, of course, shorter format is something that will be growing, but there is a space for both. There is a love for especially test cricket, and the kind of test cricket we've been seeing. It's been some of the most exciting matches ever in the last, couple of years. So there is a space for it, and I think eventually, there will be a space for all three formats in some way.
I'd like to go to Tim if he can hear us. Tim, are you there? I guess, we'll just wait till he's able to hear us. Jeshwanth sir, I mean, if we were just to while we wait for Tim, I'll come to you. You know, spoke about the attention span of fans and the changing nature of the game. How does that change your role as a grassroots man? It must be constantly evolving. I'm guessing that as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here and for your question of. See, I'll take you back to the Don Bradman days. Don Bradman played cricket with the bat and ball. Today, Surya Kumar Yadav also is playing with the bat and ball. Nothing has changed there. But what has changed is the rules. And like what Binda says that about the people who are watching the game have changed. The purists are slowly going away, and people with who want that fast kind of cricket, who attention span is less, they're coming and watching. And like the commercials need to be looked at, otherwise the game will not progress. Because we have seen many sports which have not evolved commercially are literally fizzling out. Whereas cricket, whether it is BCCI, Asian Council, or ICC, have done a terrific job. Now, coming to the coaching aspect, if I've understood you correctly, whether how do the youngsters start to play the game and what are their demands? So now, looking at me, you should. I think you know that I've spent quite a lot of time in on the cricket field coaching. So that is a good challenge. Otherwise, I would look at it as boring. It is the same thing, Whereas all these new things are coming in. Obviously, the main person whom we have to cater to is the audience. So accordingly, the cricketers also need to change. So it's a good challenge for the coach. So it is always, when to bring in these cricketing shots or the balls which the bowlers are bowling, like the slow ones, back of the hand and all those things. When do you do it? When do you do it? So why I used Don Bradman's name and took the cricket way back was because the basics of the game has not changed. So that the coach needs to keep in mind that you got to work on the basics of the young players. But then the challenge is the young player is always does not have the patience to learn the basics. So that becomes a good challenge for the coach to make him learn the basics and at the same time keep in tune with what is happening around the world currently. Thank you.
I'll perhaps have a couple of follow-ups for you on the basics not changing. I mean, I don't know. From a perennial skeptical journalist, I'll have a contrarian take to that, but I'll leave it to you. I'll just come to you on that. Snehal, if you can hear me, from a player's point of view, how do you kind of focus, right? I mean, there is so much cricket. There is tests, there is ODIs, there is T20s, now there's T10s. I think what's remaining is what in Bombay we played as box cricket. I think I'll be happy if that gets international status as well very soon. But with so many different formats, so many different things happening, how difficult it is to kind of focus? Earlier it used to be just tests and ODIs. Now, what does a player look at?
Hi, Mihir. Thanks. Hope you can hear me. And good morning to everyone here. Good morning to everyone at the symposium. I think I'm as a player, I'm like in full agreement with what Jeshwanth sir said, because the skills, the basic skills, they do not change. The basic really learning curve for the first probably 80% of your journey as a cricketer does not change. It's just that last 20% which really diverges based on which format you are playing. What we are seeing though is that, kids, because they are growing up watching a different form of cricket, they want to jump straight to that last 20%. And that almost needs to be retaught. To remind them that you have to get your basics in place in order to put yourself in a good position to succeed. So I think what does change massively is the physical demands on the player based on the format that you're playing. A lot of players, for example, I was lucky enough to grow up playing first-class domestic cricket as well as first-class, List A T20 cricket for my states. And that was a completely different physical challenge as compared to each other. So playing first class cricket and having to bowl 20 overs in a day as a fast bowler versus bowling 4 overs a day just completely had different demands, and the skills really were not so different. So it is basically a change in shift in attitude. It is basically a shift in your preparation. But the biggest difference, I think, is in the physical demands, and that is something that I slightly worry about, because with the shorter format game becoming more and more popular, as we've said, as Binda has established, driven by market forces, sometimes the physical side of things is probably the most overlooked, along with the skills preparation side of things.
I'll also like your view as a journalist now that you're on the other side of the fence. But before I proceed, just a small announcement. Tim, unfortunately, is just he's still stuck with the England press conference in Australia, so he hopefully will join us pretty soon. Fingers crossed for that. But Snehal, from a journalist point of view, when you look at everything that's going on right now, do you think all these formats will coexist? Do you see, I mean, it's like a Marvel universe, right? I mean, you can't have multiple universes coexisting in the same time. I mean, what makes way? Which format do you think will be the first one to give up?
So I'll answer that question by asking you, what's the title of the latest big hit Marvel movie that
I'm not a Marvel fan, so you won't be.
It was like Multiverse of Madness, right?
But I thought it was Endgame, so that's what if you're talking about.
So one of those movies that came out is Multiverse of Madness, and the fact that word exists in popular culture, multiverse. You see it in the DC universe, you see it in the Marvel universe, you see it in popular culture, you see it in public imagination everywhere, which tells me, which is my belief as well, that all formats can exist. They just can't exist at the same scale. So you will have, like Jeshwanth sir said, the purists who do subscribe to Test cricket, and the longer formats of the game, and you will have a generation right now who are not waking up at 5 a.m. and watching Test matches in Australia like maybe my generation did, but they are tuning in at 8 p.m. and watching the IPL and growing up to that. That is their form of inspiration. That is where they find their role models. So at least for the next 10 years, I think, while the previous generations of fans still hold a sway in the market and still really tell broadcasters and send signals to advertisers that, yes, we want to watch these kinds of things, especially when some of the bigger names are involved, these formats will coexist. I mean, it's just like, for example, reels have appeared and really become so popular, but long form writing and long form reading hasn't gone away. There is still a section of the market that exists for that. The scale is smaller, and I think we'll see a similar parallel playing out in cricket and the three formats that we have right now. Not more than three formats, but the principal three formats. So there will be a smaller but dedicated audience for the longer formats, and there will be a vast, slightly less engaged audience, or in and out engagement audience for the T20 formats. For the next 10 years, I think I see these three formats coexisting. And we also have to remember that these questions are very different for whether we're talking about men's or women's cricket, because the questions of whether these formats are relevant don't exist in women's cricket, because these formats are still very relevant. All three formats are still very relevant for women's cricket.
You mentioned fans of our generation waking up at 5:30 to watch Test matches in Australia. I'm sure there'll be fans of this generation waking up at 5:30 to watch the matches tomorrow and day after in the T20 World Cup. So that will always remain. And speaking of fans, Sam, I'll just like to get you in here. The way in which people are engaging with the sport, be it fans, be it the franchisees, media, associations. How's that changing, with the sport rapidly transforming itself as well?
Firstly, thanks so much for having me. I certainly support your sentiment at the start that it's much better to be there in person. Unfortunately, obviously, I can't be at the moment. I was there about 6 weeks ago, but with the World Cup in full swing here in Melbourne and Australia, I'm required at home. But fortunately, one of my colleagues, Mona, is there in the room today. Just in terms of, I guess the way that the game is being consumed, I certainly support some of the early statements that have been made. It's actually quite fortunate. There are some challenges that come with multi-formats, but it's actually a huge advantage, I think, to the sport. Allows us to customise in a world where personalised experiences really are becoming the norm. Being able to actually customize the content based on the consumer is really, really critical. Cricket is, we're extraordinarily fortunate in that it's the perfect highlight sport. In a world where snippets of information are consumed, being able to present, in a typical day's play, 10 to 20 wickets might fall. There are obviously some entertaining, fours and sixes along the way. It really is the perfect, if you look at it from a pure digital engagement point of view, it's just about the optimal highlight sport. So again, I think cricket has a lot of advantages. The way that it's being consumed, obviously, trending a lot more to shorter snippets of consumption, mobile devices, second screen experiences, and often tied with, I guess, other activities. So, chats, and as we shift more and more to immersive experiences, then again, that'll just play a key role in how the game's consumed going forward.
It's interesting. So I think one thing that perhaps we all on the panel, at least here, agree is that formats will coexist, interest levels will differ. But speaking of interest levels, Jeshwanth sir, when now when you're coaching a young kid, when a parent comes to you, what are their aspirations? That would have changed, I guess. Even not revealing my age. In my generation, for us, it was still perhaps Ranji, India for sure. Now, is it turned to RCB first and the rest later?
Not now. At least about 10 years ago, this has changed. And all of them want to represent IPL now. So I don't know whether that's right, because if you can, like we all discussed and we all on sync with that the foundation is the base. So then, like Snehal correctly said, it is the last 20% which you have to tweak. So if these guys, if the young players change, get the right thing, that work on the 80% at the start of their career, and then you can always adapt. It's like the foundation. If the foundation of the building is great, you can build anything on top. You can tweak. But if the foundation is shaky, and then you try to do something, you may touch the line, but I'm not sure whether you're going to last there for long. You see so many players who come in and they're there forever. So these kind of players. But these people who get in, your question of, the parents wanting them to, get onto the shorter format at the start as a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, even though they come and talk to coaches, and we coaches do convey that what is the right way to go forward. But I know that the way the kids play on the ground the next day, we know that there is a lot of homework which has been instilled in those young cricketers. Even more than those young kids, I think the parents who want them to be there on the television, and like the following is much more in the shorter formats. But my only concern, I don't know, probably that may be your next question. My only concern is, how far do you take this? Now T20 has started, and then there will be smart people who will be thinking beyond T10. T10. And now I always give this example to my friends and the people whom I meet, that, whatever be the time, whether it is 5 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, I get up and watch the Manchester United and the Manchester City matches. So now it could probably, at the end of 90 minutes, it can probably end up as a goalless draw. Yeah. Still, next morning, if there's another match of the same team, I will get up and watch. Now you can say that, what is the difference between the shorter format and Test cricket? There are a lot more sixes. So if you relate those sixers to goals, and if you have a Manchester United and City match going goalless versus 45 minutes, one team scores this penalty, and the 45 minutes, the other team keeps scoring penalty. Now, will cricket reach there? That is my scare.
Well, that's a very scary scenario indeed, if cricket is headed that way. Snehal, you're in Australia right now, right? And I keep... Oh, you're not. Okay, sorry. Just to kind of, for argument's sake, in Australia, I keep on reading a lot of reports that the number of youngsters playing cricket, taking up cricket, is reducing. Read the same reports in England. We are seeing in the Caribbean where the technical levels of the players perhaps can be debated. They're not the same. We saw they're not here in Australia as well. And even in India, the way youngsters are engaging with cricket, that's changing. I mean, in terms of access, we talk about young kids going to academies here in India, in other countries, and talking about, Surya Kumar ne kal six mara, to mujhe wo six aaj marna hai. But purely in terms of accessibility, how's cricket? And if we were to look at a global point of view, from your travels and your interactions with everyone, how accessible is cricket right now for a young person in India compared to a young person in Australia, England, Caribbean, South Africa?
I'll go back to one of my first travels to Australia, and this was a travel to Perth for one cricketing tournament, and I was just astounded walking or driving past a cricket ground, this beautiful, pristine cricket ground with perfectly cut grass and a turf wicket sitting in the center of it, and they had a board outside that said "Players required." Now this was about 10 years ago, a good 10 years ago. I think there's no doubt that the game is incredibly popular in places like Australia and England. And I look at these figures with a little bit of skepticism that, whether enrollments are dropping, it's probably something that is just going to prompt those countries to change strategies, to move a little bit more towards the public school system, to find their new fans and new players. Cricket, though, is, let's face it, it's a tricky sport to play. It's a tricky sport to get good at. It's a sport that takes a long amount of time to get good at. It's a sport that has certain amount of barriers in terms of, you need to be able to afford a bat. You need to be able to afford the protective equipment if you're playing hardball cricket, which is quite expensive, whichever country you're in and really wherever you're coming from. So the ease of adoption of traditional hardball cricket isn't great. But then, do we consider only traditional hardball cricket as cricket? Or, do we say that when people are playing in the gully or in the Western countries, people are playing in their backyards, is that also cricket? I know that, there's a number of programs which introduce cricket to kids, and those programs look different in different countries based on where those programs are implemented. In the typical England and Australia, you'll have those wind ball and those soft ball kind of cricket. You'll even have cricket with bigger balls that are actually like this big, just to make sure that there's enough contact for kids to enjoy the sport. In India and Pakistan, two countries which are so similar, our grassroots cricket looks so different. I mean, in India, we play tennis ball cricket. In Pakistan, they play tape ball cricket. So all this is also cricket. Yeah. And this kind of cricket has an ease of access that does allow cricket to become popular if that culture starts to take hold. Now, for that culture to take hold, natively especially, is sometimes quite challenging. We look at a number of cricket teams around the world, and they're driven by Indian immigration to other countries, really, where you have Indians living in those countries and they are taking up cricket there and they are populating those countries' cricket teams. But on the other hand, you have stories like Thailand in the Women's T20 World Cup, where that is a team, who qualified for the last T20 World Cup in 2020, which is made up entirely of players who have taken up the sport natively. It's not a team made up of expats. It's not a team made up of Indian immigrants who now live in Thailand. So that shows that there is potential if cricket is taken smartly to those markets, and it really depends on the people who understand those markets best in order to spread the game, because it is a slightly tricky game to play, to get good at, to master, and to really reach the top level. It requires that big investment in that 80% that Jeshwanth sir and I keep talking about. So we have to be smart about it when growing the game.
That's a great point you make actually about Thailand, and I'd like to come to you, Sam, and then to you, Binda, because we always kind of, at least here in India, we keep on talking about cricket being this religion. If it is a religion, then I think T20 is its mercenary, because the way it's spreading the game all across the world, I can't have imagined 10 years ago that Thailand would have an indigenous players team that is doing really beautifully. We're seeing how Germany keeps on making noise in cricket, at least on Twitter, they're pretty active. We're seeing different countries which traditionally we wouldn't associate with cricket coming up pretty quickly, rapidly. Is that how we should look at T20? I mean, Of course, there'll be tests. I don't know if we can say the same confidence about ODIs, but we'll have tests. We'll have perhaps the ODI, the 50-over World Cup, and then T20, where you'll have a broad-based national team competition. Is that what we are looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should recognise T20 for what it is. It's a funnel. It's a great way to attract new audiences to the game. If you look at the ICC strategic pillars, for example, a focus on getting cricket into the Olympics for LA and then Brisbane. T20 really is the only practical format that lends itself to doing that. If you look at new inventions of the game, such as the 100 and others, a big push to attract women and girls to the game, which is a huge, again, growth pillar, strategic pillar for the ICC. The growth of the game will absolutely come from growth in the women and girls games, both players' participation and, of course, then the huge fan base that generates as well. And so, again, I think that the format itself should be recognised for what it's done, and not to mention, of course, young audiences. Another key pillar of the ICC's growth strategy is the US market. Given that the way that sport is consumed in the US, the sports that exist there now and have dominant positions, cricket really to have any chance of success in that market needs to focus on these newer formats of the game, shorter, more concise games, and of course then it gives you the opportunity with facilities and other things. You can play more games of cricket more often if it's a shorter format of the game, midweek, after work, after hours, after school, and of course multiple games on a weekend. So I think absolutely you cannot deny the impact that T20 cricket has had in terms of attracting new audiences to the game, and thereby making it global. New segments of the market, opening up new territories. It's absolutely critical where they don't have that traditional base of some of the grounds and things that were mentioned earlier in Australia and other things. Not practical in other much smaller and more compact sort of territories. So yes, absolutely, T20 is a key vehicle and funnel for attracting new audiences to the game.
You mentioned the US. How vital is the US market to cricket? I mean, they tried China, not really that successful, at least so far. US seems to be catching up pretty well. Maybe the expat communities, but it still is. We have the minor league, I think, started this year. The major league starts next year. Then there's a T20 World Cup. Who knows, will be the Olympics in 28. Binda, you guys have almost anticipated a trend, of course, with T20 cricket. Two parts to the question. One, with US, how crucial will that be in terms of the overall expansion of cricket, especially T20?
Right. I'll tell you two instances, actually, one from US and one about a very interesting observation from our KKR Academy here. As you rightly said, US is a sporting nation. With the Major League Cricket that's coming up next year, what they started off 3 years earlier is start introducing cricket in schools and building it up ground top. And that is the way, each of the sports which is big in US, it's developed. And that's how, if kids start playing the game early on in their life, they have a natural interest towards it. And if they think there's a viable career in it in future, they would look towards playing it professionally in future too. We are seeing very good results already in the first 3 years, and this year particularly with minor league. There are big sponsors coming in. It's making commercial sense, and it's also a good way to tap into the local talent that's there. Not just the Indian diaspora. Of course, they'd be interested in the sport first. They will push their kids to take part in cricket first, but also because a lot of these people have been hearing about cricket from their peers, and when it's introduced in school, if it's a new sport, they'll give it a shot. And a shorter format, of course, works in a country like that. That's the way to introduce it. And already the stakeholders are very excited about the commercial aspect of the game too. Now coming back to KKR Academy, as all the other IPL franchises do too, I'm sure, we have a very strong scouting system, grassroots level scouting system and a training system. And we started the KKR Academy about 4 years back. Of course, it's not a commercial venture. It's focused towards the players that, we sign in. And we work with a local, like we work with CAB to, coach their talent too. What we've seen is the players when they come in, and since we have coaches like Bharat Arun, we have now Chandrakant Pandit, they work with us year long. And whenever they are playing domestic cricket, be it Ranji, be it, any other format that they are playing for any domestic cricket, they actually come for training and even for red ball training. If there is any specific problem they are facing, there are coaches available at the academy, and it's never only focused towards T20 cricket. At the end of the day, for any player in any IPL franchise, their goal is to represent the nation. And in any way that the academies can help them with it, that's a good thing for the franchises too. So that way, they actually have an access, as with KKR, I'm sure other franchises are doing it at their level. All around here, access to good coaches, access to great peers across other countries who they actually offline also, catch up and take tips across the year on different format of cricket. It's not restricted to T20 at all.
It's, US example, and you mentioned in it the investment part. I think that also is a very important point. I was reading a piece in the New York Times just earlier this week on, perhaps they woke up late to the whole IPL craze, but how US money is now finding Indian cricket. And some of the observations in that were pretty interesting. Sam, if I'll bring you in over here. The piece essentially said that, the investors, the VCs, the NFL, for example, the NFL team owners, they aren't necessarily in it for, quote unquote, the love of the sport. It's just quick, easy returns. Is that a safe space to enter into? As journalists, we always skeptical of too much capitalism in sport, although we understand the market realities and that's the way forward for a sport to grow. But is that the right way for any entity to enter a sport or approach a sport?
No, yeah, I'm not sure if it's necessarily the right or optimal way to enter it. What I would say is, the US, again, I think it's obviously a territory that all sports are interested in pushing into. As I mentioned earlier, so the ICC have targeted, 50 million, a growth of 50 million new fans from the US by 2032. You need to, the best way to do that and reach that goal is certainly by, taking funding where you can, looking to grow the game, make it highly visible. I would say that a market like the US, it does need to be a little bit, sort of top down in terms of the entry point, high visibility, injection of capital, and start to then generate, flow that on down through to facilities, implement the game in schools and other things. I think we have to be realistic. I understand the potential pitfalls of that. But I think in a market such as the US, we have to be realistic about the way that, any entry is going to have a chance to be successful. With that, obviously, comes that sort of capital injection and people doing that for, commercial reasons, which I think at this stage in sport and entertainment, we all understand.
We've now at a stage, I think, in cricket where it's beautifully straddled between business on one side, entertainment on other. I think many sports in India would be killing to be in that position. There's money, there are grounds, there are teams. For players, is that money tickling it? You are the one responsible, entitled to kind of produce players. Do you have enough financial resources to do that, to churn out players year after year to meet the demand?
Yeah, what's happening, what it was earlier, compared that to what is now, with all the franchising money coming, and BCCI is spending a lot of money at the grassroots. they're doing a fantastic job now. And, BCCI has to, you got to say that BCCI were lucky. They got some fantastic administrators, from the start, from a long time. There are areas where, wherever the politicians enter, they mess it up. But with cricket, it's not so. They've all done, even the politicians who have gotten to cricket and BCCI, they've done a very good job. So that way it is coming in. Yes, there is a huge disparity, but that's how it should be. What KL Rahul was earning about 10 years ago or 15 years ago to now, he deserves to earn what he's earning now. So, but a KL Rahul 15 years ago when he started, had to invest a lot of money from his own pockets. Whereas now, if there is talent, like Binda was saying, that the franchises will grab them, or BCCI in their structured cricket also is spending a lot of money in junior cricket, and I'm very happy about it. And it can still go a long way, but it has come a long way.
Snehal, the balance of the global game, right? I mean, we're seeing money in the sport, but it's essentially money pouring into the IPL, into Indian cricket, and perhaps not the same amount of money that's being spent or being invested in other countries. This whole disproportionate investment into sport, what kind of challenges will that bring in? Because we might be seeing a scenario where, I mean, we see that a lot in football, right? We talk about, say, for example, in Europe, where top 4 or 5 clubs are super wealthy, and then you have the rest, and the gap is just too huge, where 15 clubs are just chasing the top 4, and they're in the league of their own. In cricket, do you think we might end up in a scenario where there'll be India, there'll be this huge gap financially, and then the rest?
I don't think so. I mean, we definitely have a top three who really financially sit in a very different position to most other countries when it comes to international cricket. England, Australia, and India are, some of the traditional powers. What I definitely would like to see is more money flowing into associate cricket, more money flowing into cricket, which really helps into funding, which really helps build cricket in other markets. Like Sam mentioned, the ICC has identified growth markets, and for this particular cycle, USA is that particular growth market. So there is a realization that cricket needs to invest money in countries outside of the traditional top 10, top 15 to build cricket there, because your system is really just as strong as the weakest team in your particular system. Your World Cup is as attractive as the quality of cricket that all the countries there can put up, for sure. This is something I hope would happen in cricket. It's something we see very successfully in leagues. For example, in the IPL, the fact is that the IPL is a closed model where central revenue that is earned by the BCCI is distributed equally amongst the franchisees. And we've seen that produce brilliant standard of cricket year on year, because everyone is really being invested with the same amount of base level money. Then it's up to how smart and how proactive the franchisees are to earn on top of that and really increase their revenues as much as possible. But whether you come first or whether you come 8th or 10th, you still receive a certain amount of fixed income from the central body. Can something like that happen in cricket? It's not unthinkable, because we see that in other international sports as well. I think, if I'm right, FIFA has a distribution model which is not really as heavily weighted towards the top as cricket is. So FIFA has a slightly more equitable distribution model of funds which come in from their central revenue, which then helps take football around the world, making it really the world's most popular and most easily accessible sport right now. So this is something I would definitely love to see, especially because I recognize that this funding is incredibly important to grow the women's game in any country. And like Sam has mentioned, that is really going to be where your generation of new fans are coming from. And that is something that I hope cricket recognizes, that the more money we really push towards the bottom of the funnel, the stronger the top of the funnel and the entire system becomes.
But you mentioned Football World Cup. FIFA is able to distribute money across worlds. I mean, India gets enough funds from FIFA because their flagship event, the World Cup, generates that kind of revenue. Here, does ICC generate enough money from its World Cup to distribute equally to all countries? Is that happening?
The ICC generates a tremendous amount of income from their world events. This is something that we've seen in the recent last 6 months, where IPL rights have gone to market and have fetched a good amount of money. Following that, ICC rights went to the India market and have also been picked up for what was expected to be the value that they have picked up. So the ICC World Cups and the ICC World events, whether that's your men's or women's under 19 World Cups, your men's T20, women's T20 World Cups, they are a strong commercial property for the ICC, and it generates a large amount of revenue for the ICC. The distribution model is very different to what it looks like for FIFA, but for sure the ICC has very strong products in terms of its World Cups, which is generating a good amount of revenue, which is really sustaining international cricket in many of these countries. A lot of the countries, especially outside of the top 10 associate nations, remember the ICC has about 100 members, so it's not just like the 10-15 countries that we're talking about. So those probably 75 members really depend to a great deal on that ICC revenue, which is being generated and passed down the funnel based on how they are doing their development to sustain and grow cricket in those countries.
Binda, coming to you, I mean, when we talk about the growth of cricket, as franchisees, how do you see your role in it? You're involved in 4 countries right now, I'm guessing, or 5?
4.
4 countries. So in those 4 countries, does the Knight Rider franchisee play an active role or see its responsibility to kind of grow the sport? I mean, we see the money coming in. We were talking just outside about, the supporting areas, say the stadium or the training facilities getting a boost. But in the UAE, in the US, in the Caribbean, where does Knight Riders fit in the growth of the sport debate?
So the learnings from IPL with Kolkata Knight Riders that we have gathered, the endeavor is to replicate it across all the other teams that we have, be it the academy that we've initiated, replicating it in Caribbean. It's already started. In UAE, especially in a nation like UAE, where again the kids primarily, kids locally there, they're more into football, and cricket is a sport they need to be introduced to. So it's a work we've already initiated to start it from the grassroots level, take our coaching staff, work with the kids in school across UAE and introduce them to cricket, coach them on cricket. In fact, in US, our involvement with Major League Cricket is much more. We are, in fact, developing a stadium there, and soon you'll hear more about it. So, to the extent, because again, there are not enough international level cricket stadiums there. So, building it ground up, it takes a little bit of time and a lot of investment, and we're looking at an horizon of 5 to 10 years minimum for it to actually be commercially viable. Similarly, with women's cricket, this was the first year in Caribbean they introduced the women's version of Caribbean Premier League. And there were only 3 teams which were selected by the West Indies board, actually, which 3 franchises would have the teams. And we were lucky to have a women's team there. And cherry on the pie, we won the inaugural championship. A great learning again there. The coaching staff which we have, the infrastructure that we've built around, how we can actually cross-pollinate, utilize it for all the teams, be it men or women. There are a lot of learnings. There's a coaching staff you build, and more you grow the ecosystem, you can utilize it better. But most of these, like in US or in women's cricket, our initiative is not something that we're looking at making money year 1 or year 2. You have to look at a longer horizon, invest initially, build it ground up.
Right. Jeshwanth sir has to go. So before I just let you leave, we talk about club versus cricket, and that's one of the burning topics of the day. I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I personally wouldn't have imagined a player at his prime saying that I won't play tests, I won't play ODIs, and I'll focus on leagues. How does that make you feel, that thought?
Oh, it's a question which bothers every sport, and I don't know whether my opinion has got any relevance
Of course it
because
does. Of course it has.
yeah, say you ask me this question currently today at my age, I will say that it is the country which should have been. Supposing if I were 20-year-old and if you had asked the same question, I don't know, my answer could have been different because I don't know. I really don't know. So the world has gone through this. The world has gone through this and it will go through this. So cricket is facing that now. So it has to play out, and there will be some fantastic individuals who will put up their hand, anything for the country. Great. That tribe should be there. But at a young age, how many of them will be able to do that?
That's a thought. Cricketers retiring uh, at 30, 32, and then you have younger ones, and also them just going out to T20s and stuff. For you now going forward, when we talk about the next decade of the sport, uh, what do you think will be making of a cricketer? Like, what skills will they require to excel?
Yeah, certainly he has to adapt to the current game. There's no taking away from that. But like how I started that, it's the basics which he has to work on, because no taking away from that. Because like I said, game has not changed. The rules around the game have changed, so you have to adapt to the rules. So it will. And in the next 10 years, I think the current generation will adapt to it, because the younger kids today are far more intelligent than what little earlier. So they have access to the coaching staff. They have access to the good coaches. So all this will help the current generation or the coming generation in the next 10 years to develop much more quickly, and with all the facilities which are being provided by the BCCI, and with the franchisee money coming in, the curve is on the up.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I'll
Thank you.
let you go. Please,
Yeah.
a round of applause for
Yeah.
Jeshwanth sir. It's been great having you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to leave a little early. Snehal and Sam, I'll take leave of you. And Tim, welcome. And all,
It's
all
high
the
and bye
best.
for Tim
Hi,
and
hi.
Jeshwanth.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Hi, Tim. Great timing for you to join, because we'll need a journalist talking about certain touchy topics that we'll be talking about right now. Snehal has been holding forth. Binda has been here. Sam's there as well. We were talking about club versus country. I'll bring you straight in. And I know it's a topic that's been discussed to death. But this whole shift that the sport is seeing right now, and the number of players saying goodbye to tests, saying goodbye to the national teams, becoming kind of T20 mercenaries of sorts. As a journalist, as someone who's written books on cricket, who's written thousands of words on the sport, how does that make you feel?
Hi, yeah. Firstly, everyone, very sorry for coming so late. Something with England went on a bit too long. I'm out here in Sydney. So yeah, on the club v countries, I think a good way to start is if you think of cricket, where does it sit compared to other sports? Well, actually, historically, cricket has been very, very unusual in that it's basically revolved around nation v nation contests. That's where it's really earned almost all of its money from. So very, very unusual. And you look at something like football, which is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. So you have international tournaments, which are very, very popular, but the sort of beating heart of the sport is very much in the club game. So where are we? I think we're on a shift between the kind of old cricket model, and then you have the kind of football model. And cricket's on a journey. It's probably about halfway between those two at the moment. The question is kind of where it ends up. But yeah, the direction of travel is pretty clear to see, and I think we'll see the IPL expanding and so on. Of course, we're kind of at the cusp of really 12-month-a-year franchise contracts. So players getting contracts with, the Knight Riders franchise, say, to play not just in the IPL, but in other leagues as well. And all of that is going to, encourage more players to follow the footsteps of Trent Boult, who's left his contract with New Zealand, even though New Zealand are very, very flexible generally, to basically become a freelancer.
You mentioned player contracts. Binda, I'll get you in over here. It's a tricky scenario, right? I mean, you have you'll have 4 teams playing in 4 leagues. You'll perhaps have players who will be contracted longer than just a 3-month stint for IPL. In such a scenario, how do you kind of get a balance between the players' interests, what the national team requires, and also for a franchisee, because eventually you're paying for most of it. So how does everything fit in terms of interests?
So, I mean, when you have a Night Riders kind of brand, which, has teams across uh, soon in four different leagues, the endeavor will always to have a similar, one set of core team. But of course, I mean, it finally eventually depends upon the interest of the player too. The way the windows for all these leagues are also made, it kind of doesn't clash with a major international tournaments happening at that time. And there's also flexibility on, sometimes cricketers, if they are representing their national team, they don't take part in certain part of the league and they join in at a certain point. It's completely flexible about, how they want to take it up to. But of course, number of cricketers in every country is growing, and there are younger cricketers coming in, and there are sometimes, good cricketers who are not getting to play for their national teams. So, in that case, if they are looking at focusing on the league cricket, it's completely their choice. But we have the flexibility of if there is a tournament that they want to go for, and if they've been selected for the national team. There have been various instances, even in IPL, in fact, when players have sat through because like even in Caribbean Premier League, Big Bash was happening, and simultaneously Caribbean Premier League started, and there was a new format called 60, which started the T10 format, and there was an overlap with Big Bash. So we are flexible again. There are certain players, they have commitment to other leagues, to their national teams, and there is a flexibility finally on the player on what they want to focus on.
Right. Snehal, I mean, we are in the middle of a T20 World Cup, and we saw the kind of emotions it stirs up. Saw during India-Bangladesh, India-Pakistan perhaps is the all-time best example, but also Australia-New Zealand, Australia-England, India-Australia for that matter. We can go on and on. Do you think a franchisee cricket, a league, will stir up same level of emotions as the national team does?
Yeah, I think so. I think just the scale is going to be less because that emotion is really going to be localized to the hardcore fans of that particular franchise. And that's why it's going to look like, it's less emotion, but it's just as much commitment. It's on a slightly smaller scale. We are going to see, I think, especially if what you were talking about earlier and what Binda was talking about earlier, we have more consistency of players across franchises, and there is a much more consistency allows fans to build franchise loyalties rather than player-based loyalties. I think that is something that will contribute to the growth of fandom within that particular franchise. We see franchisees putting in a tremendous amount of money into delivering content around their teams and allowing fans to connect more and more with their teams. So that is just going to grow and grow and build the appetite. I think we will get to the point probably in 5 to 10 years where the franchisees do have that kind of loyalty. What I do think also is that we are going to see that loyalty divided. For example, Mumbai Indians fans will only watch Mumbai Indians matches and really not watch the rest of the IPL. A KKR fan will only watch KKR matches and not watch the rest of the IPL. And that's in a world saturated by cricket. I think it's going to become a little more focused, become a little more niche as to what the fans prefer, because these franchisees are putting out enough material for that fan to consume around that particular brand and around that particular franchise.
Sam, in a sport that's being saturated by too much cricket, say for example, what role does sports tech play in terms of engaging and keeping the interest levels alive? Simple thing, I mean, is say for example T20 more engaging because ODI and tests will require longer commitments. We spoke about shorter time spans and attention spans that youngsters apparently have today. In all those things, in keeping the interest alive, and also in this whole club versus country debate, where does tech fit in terms of data and all else that follows? Even betting, even though we don't have it in India, at least technically, it's there somewhere. But how do you monitor the interest levels when the national team plays compared to a league team?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, as we mentioned, I think everyone, it's quite well established what the key sort of, audience engagement and retention sort of triggers are in terms of personalized content and immersive experiences and so on. So what you need to do then is apply that. And if you look at the club versus country sort of transition, I certainly support Tim's comments from earlier. Really what you find is, one of the key focuses in that fan loyalty becomes about the players themselves as opposed to who they're representing. US sport has a really strong focus on making, the character the hero. And I think cricket is starting, is taking on that shape and will need to. So from a digital experience point of view, we have to honour that and recognise that a personalised experience for a fan is understanding, typically experiences are presented in terms of a team or a match. How do we make that journey about being able to follow and sort of richly engage with a particular player or multiple players as they, travel the world and represent, different tournaments and things. So ensuring the digital experiences map to and marry with what is happening in the game with 12-month contracts and other things, that's really, really important. So the other bit that is an ongoing challenge for us that we're constantly looking at within Sportradar is, how you target the depth of the information. How sophisticated is your audience? And that, there's a huge spectrum from casual fans to, really sort of traditional fans that want to dive deep into the tactics, the data and other things. So, our position is to always capture as much data as we can. Our big focus is fast and deep data, and then surfacing that based on the audience. We simplify at times to tell interesting stories and narratives. And in other cases, we're presenting quite complex information so that fans can really immerse themselves in the tactics of the game, feel more educated, and therefore participated in the game more fully.
Right. Tim, I have a couple of questions for you. One from earlier thread that we touched upon. For young players, when you look at countries outside India, Australia, UK, what are the pathways? What are the aspirations for a young man picking up a bat or picking up a ball?
I think on one level they're what they always have been, which is to make a good living from the sport. We see all the talk of kind of freelance players being new now, and we are seeing this trend happen more. But if you look at the history of cricket, you had, Larry Constantine in the 1930s was sometimes missing West Indies test matches because he was earning more in league cricket in Lancashire. So in that sense, what we're seeing, kind of the basic need to make a career out of cricket is the same, but clearly that's now driving players in a different direction. So if you're not from, probably, as you said, India, Australia and England, then you're likely to be able to earn more in general on the free market in franchise leagues. So this does change the dynamics a lot. And so we've kind of traditionally, we've often talked about, should there be windows for domestic competitions? It's always kind of gone the other way, where can there be windows for international cricket between all those domestic competitions, which are occupying more and more of the calendar? And I think this is one of the challenges for international cricket, is that how can it, almost the worst case for international cricket is if it kind of keeps on blindly trying to schedule as much as possible, you end up with a situation where you get more Trent Bolts and actually you kind of lose the middle class of international cricket, which in a way is what holds it up. You can't just have 3 or 4 countries that are strong and everyone else being weak because the best players don't even play that. So the challenge for international cricket is kind of a less is more challenge. If it can just get enough gaps in the schedule where it's going to be the best players from New Zealand, the best players from South Africa and stuff, then that still keeps international cricket, keeps its USP really. And if you're playing for the sake of playing, you end up playing countries that are resting a lot of players, then I think the international game loses its luster ever more, and you're left in the position where, there's going to be less and less kind of airtime and interest given over to international cricket, which is very, very dangerous for it. So yeah, a lot of challenges, and basically has to adjust to the new landscape really. Otherwise, the value and the relevance of international cricket will just diminish, and we might even get to a stage where we get in football where when there's a gap in the Premier League schedule, lots of fans are kind of moaning, "Oh no, it's an international break." Not impossible that if big stuff's not managed, we get to that level in cricket as well.
Well, if we ever reach that stage where there's a gap between the domestic season for international matches, I just wonder if we'll be dissing the international break in cricket as much as we do in football. But just to close this session, Tim, I'll continue with you because you mentioned a couple of points which I'd like to pick. Are we then going ahead and say by the end of this decade, are we looking at a scenario where perhaps like football, the World Cup might become the focal point of cricket, and around it will be the domestic leagues across the world? Do you think we are headed towards that direction?
I think we probably are. There are opportunities for international cricket, as I said. But I think in general that path is pretty clear, and I think the IPL is going to expand more and more as well. So I guess we've seen the World Cups are going to remain very, very big. A big question for Test cricket is, can the World Test Championship actually be elevated? At the moment, I think it doesn't. It's just a one-off event, doesn't work that well. But if you had maybe semi-finals and then a final, you had a sort of a 3 or 4 week long event. I think that actually could build up a bit more of a narrative and have it like a World Cup of Test cricket. I think that would be very important for the Test game, and actually that being successful in turn would give more bilateral international Test cricket more relevance as well. And so without getting the kind of marquee event in Test cricket on a really high plane, then you worry about all the rest of it, and it just lacking context. Again, broadcasters always say context. If you're watching New Zealand, Sri Lanka, what is the context of that match in a bilateral game? World Cup, it's clear. Whereas if you're watching an IPL game, there is clear context in terms of reaching the playoffs or whatever. So international cricket has been very complacent for a very long time. And I guess the hope is the competition from domestic cricket is actually going to force international cricket to raise its game, to create more context, more matches that have deeper interest and value, and that will actually help these formats to coexist and the kind of domestic and international cricket ecosystems to coexist rather than domestic kind of cannibalizing the international game, which certainly is a possibility.
Right, Snehal, onto you. The big question for the next few years, of course, will be cricket, T20 cricket, perhaps at the Olympics. You were at the CWG, you saw how the women's T20 played out at the CWG. How big a boost will that be? Will that be a boost at all if cricket goes to the Olympics? Be it just women's cricket or men's and women's both? How does that play out in the next 5-6 years?
I think everyone here will probably agree that cricket being at the Olympics will be massive for the growth of the international game, and I'll again probably say that it's the growth of the game outside of the top 10 countries, because what we saw with Thailand and the Women's T20 World Cup and their story is that because they participated in the Southeast Asian Games, or one of the locally held Olympic sport games, they accessed funding from their national sporting body, which basically allowed them to contract full-time cricketers, which allowed them to develop those players, and for those players to really give the return on investment and help them qualify for the T20 World Cup. So participation in Olympics and cricket becoming an Olympic sport allows other countries an access to funding outside of ICC funding. So you can have access to, you can get some money from ICC for development of the sport in your country. You can also get funds from your local National Olympic Committee, which then helps you develop the sport in that country. So for cricket to become a really global sport and grow outside of the top 10 to top 12 markets, for cricket to become a sport for all, a sport for men, women, disabled cricketers as well, Olympic participation is something that is absolutely critical. I think everyone in the top brass of cricket recognizes the value of that. And for me, particularly the value of what Olympic participation would unlock for the women's game especially is really exciting. So I think, and I know that everyone in cricket is really making a very strong push towards inclusion in LA.
Sam, in terms of data and numbers and the rest, cricket is still very at a very nascent stage of development. It's nowhere close to what we see with baseball and basketball in the US or even football in Europe. Going forward, what will be the XG equivalent in cricket? How do you kind of go deep into numbers, data to tap the potential of a vast fan market, a fan base?
Yeah, look, I think we're at a really interesting and quite pivotal time in terms of, let's call it, cricket's sort of Moneyball journey. I definitely see that there's been a shift, and a significant one in the last 5 years, where I would say now that an extraordinary amount of data has been captured, more than ever before. Further insights on the game. And it is now sort of universally recognised, that old school mentality of, looking at identifying talent because, I know a good cricketer when I see one has definitely been abolished. So the value of data is recognised. But what we've got is a really interesting time where I don't think the data is yet fully understood. Teams at the moment are utilising it for things like matchups in particular, ball spinning away, ball spinning in, likelihood, spin v pace, some quite sort of, I guess, rudimentary sort of analysis to help them with tactics. An area that we're particularly focused on at the moment is around field placements, the way that, certain fields are set up, particularly in the T20 and one-day games, and, based on different delivery types, batter-bowler combinations and so on. I think that's a really, really interesting part of the game. And then you've got the deeper analysis that comes from actual supporting player development. So, there's sort of three main areas of data that we look at. Data that informs on-field tactics, data that helps with the building of teams and squads, which teams, and in franchise cricket, which teams are most likely to be successful, how they're compiled. And then the really interesting sort of part at the moment for us is looking at the development of talent. So, things like spin rates and other things for not just spin bowlers, but actual fast and medium pace bowlers, really, really critical in deception for batters and so on and so forth. So again, I think it's a really, really exciting time for the development and use of data within cricket. We've got an extraordinary amount of data that's been captured, and every day we're learning new ways that help sort of that inform talent ID, player development, predictability of cricket games. And all of that is only good for, obviously, high-performance teams, coaches and academies, and, of course, the audience as we surface that in really engaging ways along the way.
Fantastic. Binda, I started with you. I'll end with you. You're the marketing person. You're the person in suits. How do you look at cricket? Just to kind of sum up our session, what's the future of cricket according to you?
I mean, very nicely, actually, Snehal had mentioned, the multiverse of cricket that we are living through. One thing also we need to look at from the broadcaster side, the whole challenge today is, how not just the cricket loving people that we are. I mean, we've grown up with cricket. We will watch cricket. But we need to focus on today a 10-year-old who's growing up, 10 years after when he's 20. Either he aspires to be a cricketer or loves watching cricket and is going to be cheering for cricket. So how do we make sure that kid, 10-year-old who's currently is on his phone playing a game on Roblox, how do we get into the mind of that kid and make it entertaining and interesting for that person to watch the sport? If there is any innovation, even, from, of course, format side, but even from the broadcaster side, they need to look at. And that is the reason, they need to focus on how do we get technology, get VR experience, make it more engaging for them, the second screen experience along with watching the sport, that they can't just, we can't let go of their attention while they are watching cricket. And those are the kind of things we need to start working on, be it in developing the sport for them as well as the viewing experience. And that part of the conversation also needs to start, the viewing experience along with the sport itself.
We've started that with you, Binda, today. I'm sure it will continue for the years to come. Thank you all of you guys for being there. Should we throw open the floor for questions if there are any? Okay, we have one right here. So, first of all, good morning, everyone. There's a mic here. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. So first of all, good morning, everyone. I hope all you're doing well and good. So my first, there's a two part of the question. So recently we are seeing that there's a wave of the technological advancement happening in the sports, and e-sport is something which is growing market right now. We already saw that in the PUBG. India is representing in the international events, as well as right now in also chess is also something which in the next year, in a couple of years, it's going to be in an IPL style franchisee league, and Anand Mahindra is also backing that league, and Vishy Anand is the commissioner. So how we can also replicate same model into the cricket, because Big Hand Studio is someone which is developing the games for the PC and PS4. So, and what is the role of the Knight Riders group, because they are already expanding their businesses around the globe, and how we can enter and penetrate the esport market, because there's a very huge potential right now. And I think in the within this year we had a online event of the PUBG, and we saw a huge viewership in that. So how we can penetrate it in the cricket? Thank you, everyone.
So the esports business per se is different, is a separate business proposition we look at. Currently, the focus is on how do we make cricket more relevant to to the young audience, and how do we make it more interesting, that that person's going to spend enough time watching the game. So around that, actually, we are developing a lot of things around that, a whole ecosystem around it. Building this fan base, of course, Kolkata Knight Riders, we have a huge fan base, as do many other IPL franchises too. How do we make the fan base younger? How do we connect with them? Giving unique experiences, which, only a franchise can provide, because we are with the players for that. Be it the kind of stories that the players are going through, their personal stories is something very inspiring that we try to and again, Snehal had pointed out that the kind of idols and role models you build. So one of the thing is, among these cricketers, for them to for the kids to aspire to be cricketers, these IPL players need to be their role model too, bringing out their stories, even creating gamified experience on our app to engage better, having a loyalty program which is more engaging. These are the things we are working on.
Right. Yeah, we have 4 hands raised. You can just go to the gentleman in the back, please. Then we'll come to you, and then you. Yeah.
Hi, good morning to everyone. So my question is this. Is there a concept for franchise-based test cricket? Because what I've gathered is that, the prism now is set that, we look at cricket through the prism of T20 to sustain viewership interest. But my experience has been as a fan that, like somebody mentioned about, waking up at 5:30 to watch the cricket match in Australia. Now, if that is not being sort of projected to the younger people, then obviously they grow up on a diet of, T20 itself. So to preserve all forms of cricket and more the traditional form of cricket, engagement by franchisees to, promote the long form cricket, is that even a concept, or is it going to be, we're going to have T20 now and the rest may or may not catch up?
Is there for someone specific on the panel?
No, anyone can take that question.
Binda, Tim, Sam, who'd like to take that?
I'm happy to go.
All right, please do.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. And yeah, you do think actually Test cricket has never really been marketed properly outside of a few events such as the Ashes and maybe India-Pakistan when it was happening. We've never really had that kind of marketing push that we've seen in T20. So it would have been fascinating to see it happen. Unfortunately, I'm pretty skeptical whether it will ever happen. I think partly because Test cricket does lean on the kind of international rivalry and that long history now, almost 150 years. And just, most Test cricket loses money. So even when New Zealand, who are the current World Test champions, when they host a Test match, they lose about $500,000 US. So it's not kind of washing its face. And I think, it would be fascinating to see. Maybe if we had a sort of 3 or 4 teams, very, very high quality, that would be a fascinating thing to see. You know, almost the equivalent of World Series cricket a few generations on. It would have been great to see it. Kind
With
of
a
be now
smile,
with a
I can,
passion
Tim,
for
I
Test
can.
cricket.
You're fantasizing with the concept. I can sense it with your smile right now.
I think it's a lovely idea. I just don't think
It's a
it'll ever
great
happen,
idea, actually,
unfortunately. It's a tantalizing thought. We can all pick our dream teams and, you know, play Mumbai v Sydney or whatever, and it would be great.
It will be. We have a question here on the last one. Then we just come there. How much time do we have for questions? If someone can. All right, cool. We have 10 minutes, so yeah, I think we'll be able to fit in. Yeah.
Two questions. Snehal, do you think the number of T20 leagues coming up, do you think that is a way for associate nations and players to push their players into this league, start playing high octane matches with established internationals, and then that is a way for them to grow the sport in the country? And for Binda, is that something that franchises should be looking at, expanding, getting associate nations players into the league, giving them an opportunity to share, play under good coaches, and then that's a way to enter the market?
Sorry,
I think. Sorry, Binda, please go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'll just quickly chime in on this. I think what we do need to recognize, Sam mentioned this before, that the US has really identified hero building as a way to grow the sport. We talked about role models, and any kind of competition that gives visibility to these lesser known heroes is going to be a good thing for that particular country, because they are going to allow more fans to develop in that particular country. Needs to be balanced a little bit with so many other factors, but we are seeing this happen in the new T20 leagues that are coming up, the UAE T20 league, where it's not just restricted to players of a certain country, and you have players from a number of associate nations coming in. There is a talk about the women's IPL when it comes in, that each team can have one associate player as well, along with the 4 overseas players. So this will definitely give these players visibility. I think back to, again, the women's T20 challenge, where Natakan Chantam, who really didn't make an impact with the bat, but that one piece of outstanding fielding where she completely was in the air and dived and stopped the ball, it just went viral. And I imagine that one viral clip would have helped cricket grow in Thailand just a little bit, even though the competition was being played in India. So I do think that these opportunities will definitely help grow cricket in those particular countries. But again, that needs to be balanced with enough international cricket for those countries and those fans to feel relevance and a connection with their national team as well.
Binda?
Yeah. So, again, for in IPL and KKR that we've seen, there are, players every season that's groomed and they perform in a certain way. And when we are working closely with them across the year, actually, very good, powerful stories emerge. And these are stories, that need to be told, because it's not necessarily that they might become the next big cricketer, but it actually opens eye to lots of kids that, okay, this is the reason I want to be in the sport. There's a possibility for me to also reach there. So these kind of players, actually, we have had even players from different teams going to our other teams in other sports. But of course, currently the way it is, BCCI is structured, we can't have Indian players associated with the team going to other leagues. But in women's cricket, of course, I mean, we don't know what the regulations are going to be. We'll know over the next few months. But that's the way you grow the sport. Once, especially in a thing like women's cricket, allowing women cricketers to play across different leagues, giving them that exposure will only inspire more cricketers to get into the sport and taking it up as a serious career for themselves. So, but let's see over the next few months how it rolls out.
Right. We have time for 2 questions. Sanjana and then her, please. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I don't know a whole lot about cricket business or any kind of business. I'm a sports scientist by profession. So while I was listening to all the conversations, very interesting stuff, I was just wondering, this is more of a comment than a question. Perhaps we also want to look at responsible cricket, because each of these kids and children we are trying to kind of recruit somewhat, that sounds a little scary. because we all seem to be looking at recruiting young children into a sport, not so much for the love and passion of the sport or the growth of the child, but just to, create more cricketers and get, more business and more viewership, etc., out of it. So if you could make it a little more responsible, because, for example, if you look at the different cricket formats, I'm new to cricket since the last 3-4 years, and what I understand as a psychologist is that a test cricket has so much more to the character building of a child or an individual compared to other formats. So how about making test cricket compulsory up to a certain age or up to a certain level, correct? And also, I want to believe when we talk about children and kids, the parents are the stakeholders we need to look at. So if you could kind of highlight the character building, the value, the belief system growth that the sport kind of brings to the child, and then rather than just talk about the existing stories, if you could create many more stories of success, not just in terms of outcomes, but in terms of efforts, then I think that to me would be a good future to the cricket. So,
No, I think that's a great point because, as they say, test cricket is a test of character. So yeah, I mean, Binda, you want to add something?
Yeah,
there?
I'll just add on to it. I mean, great observation. But my understanding is playing any form of sport while you're growing up, be it test cricket, T20, gully cricket, football, any form of sport is very essential for a kid because it makes a kid understand that you don't win all the time. And sports is black and white, there is no hiding away from it. You win or lose. And it's very important at a growing age to realize that you won't win all the time. And so it's not the format of the cricket or which sport, it's essential for every kid. And all the more in a country like India to have infrastructure available, coaching available, mentors available to play any kind of sport and have a sporting spirit. That is essential. Of course, I mean, again, when we work with the state boards, and we work closely with CAB, they have different kind of regulations, especially for under 16 cricket. We, sponsor some of the CAB events too. They have very strict guidelines on the format of cricket, especially the youngsters would play. They encourage them to play long format cricket. You're right. And, that is something that in a way, they should be kind of motivated, and then they can choose. Once they grow up, they can make their choice how they want to take their cricketing career ahead. But at that level, and a lot of the different state associations are doing it, and we completely support that. We do sponsor those kind of tournaments too.
Right. Last question. We'll have the person in brown jacket here, please. Sorry, nothing personal against anyone who have been missed out, but will.
Talking about the future of cricket, recently on Twitter, Iceland Cricket Board posted that they are going to start a cricket tournament and they are going to start their own cricket team. So I wanted to know from all the panelists that will it be possible for any cricket board or any franchisee to support such new teams, because many new teams are coming up? And also I wanted to know that the new teams which are coming up, like Iceland Cricket Board, is it because of the shorter format of the game, or will it increase the viewership of the cricket? And talking about the future of the cricket.
Yeah, he's asked to all panelists. So if guys can, Sam, you've been on mute for a while, so if you can start, please.
Sorry, it was a little bit difficult to hear, but I assume the question was sort of structured around,
Basically, Iceland expressing interest to play cricket, starting a team, and if it's anything to do with T20, and if that's the motivator.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier, I definitely think that T20 is enabling, it is more practical and feasible for new territories, new markets to enter into the game. The length of game, the various, components of it lend itself more to being able to start the game up in non-traditional cricket territories, absolutely. And again, I guess that sort of growing, that spread of popularity of the game goes to a lot of the points that have been covered already during the course of the discussion today. Wider exposure, that the the less gender bias and more, sort of activity amongst women and girls game, and so on. I think all these things, the higher visibility of the game lends itself to more interest. And then now we have a format that is somewhat, it is more feasible. Having said that, there's obviously, still always going to be, logistical challenges in those new territories. I'm not, closely or specifically aware of the motivations of the Iceland tournament. But I will say that, T20 definitely does lend itself to the game being established in new markets more readily.
Right. Snehal, Tim, and then Binda, just to close this.
Sorry, Mihir, I couldn't catch you.
No, if you have any thoughts on Iceland and smaller countries, basically, Iceland being an example, but smaller countries aspiring to either form a national team or start competing at a higher stage. Is that what we are looking at? I mean, it's interesting at a time when we're talking about club versus country that new countries are kind of trying to make a splash on international scene.
I think I'm not particularly sure about, again, not closely aware of the Iceland situation, but there are just so many countries who want to make it to World Cups, want to make it to events where, you get high visibility. We talk about this a lot in terms of just how big the FIFA World Cup is and how, qualifying for that FIFA World Cup is such a huge issue of prestige. For Cricket World Cups to expand and just include a wider number of teams, a larger number of teams would be great, which would allow so many countries more opportunities to qualify for that big stage. And that is the direction we are seeing with ICC events in the next cycle. They are expanding, and there are going to be more and more opportunities for these teams to be playing in a different format from what we're seeing in this particular T20 World Cup. We won't have the 2 rounds really. We'll just have one big T20 World Cup. So for countries to be aspiring to these bigger tournaments this is one of the reasons these tournaments exist, to give every country a platform. And the qualification processes are also then become very high stakes tournaments where even just, one bad day can affect not just the amount of visibility you get, but the amount of funding that you get, because teams that qualify for the World Cup receive a certain amount of funding. So that is something that a number of countries are aspiring to. And we're seeing that build, like I said before, T20 stars who maybe make their name in T20 leagues from lesser known countries, go back and then pull their countries really up the ranks in international cricket would be a great narrative where the club and the country game can coexist and help each other.
Tim, can they coexist?
Yeah, I think that they can coexist, but cricket needs some sort of joined up thinking at the administrative level, which it has generally lacked. So that's a big challenge. But I do think, so the T20 World Cup is expanding to 20 teams. So that is going to, and as Snehal said, no sort of first stage / qualifier. So that's actually going to be a really positive thing. So we're going to see more and more countries get to that. Obviously, the next World Cup is in the US, hosted by the US and West Indies. So that's going to be an interesting attempt. Part of cricket's big push in America, which still has quite a long way to go, to be honest, because again, the governance in US cricket is a bit of a mess. But I think, T20, we're seeing more and more the barriers to entry being reduced. We haven't on the women's game, actually, very interesting. We saw Thailand reach the T20 World Cup in 2020. Thailand's men's team, I think, ranked in the 60s. So that's the first real instance of a women's team really rising way before their men's team have. And the reason it hasn't happened before is because actually the funding, which is a problem, is generally linked to how well that your men's team do. So I'd like to see the ICC be a bit more proactive and actually in sort of decoupling funding and having an avenue where you can really rise as a nation a lot just on the basis of your women's team. There was a bit of a tension here where Afghanistan are a full member now. They've never had a women's team at all, and they can still be a full member. Whereas Thailand, who have a good women's team, but not so good men's team, there's not really an avenue for them to become full member. So there's still that inconsistency. And we see in other sports such as football, there's a history of women's team. You don't just get the same hierarchy of countries in the men's and women's game. And it'd be a really good opportunity for cricket to actually encourage that to happen in a women's game here, and by doing that, you have more countries. We actually saw. So we have Thailand, you have Brazil, who were the first country to give a full set of national contracts to their women's squad before their men's squad. These are great initiatives, and it'd be good to see those encouraged more. And again, there's this sort of different paths to the game, because clearly men's cricket with the history, the kind of barriers to entry a little bit higher. So women's game, you're more likely to see a kind of insurgent country rise from not very much to reaching a top 10, top 15 in not too long. So yeah, giving that every chance to happen would be another way for the sport to globalise.
Right, Binda, final word. Will there be Iceland Knight Riders in 2032?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's another thing to see if they will have an ecosystem enough to have a league of their own. It has to be evaluated on its own. But it's a welcome thing to have countries which are currently not participating in cricket actively to participate, because many of these countries have great athletes, in other sports. So, getting them migrated to cricket, and we will only get more diverse talent into the pool. So it's exciting time.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks for those questions. I think we all enjoyed.
Is there a time for one more question?
Well, you have a mic in your hand, so I can't say no.
So, hi, this is Vedant. So I have two questions actually. It's open for
one,
all.
come on.
Okay, let's go start with first one. So this is drawing parallel to Neymar Juniors 5, which is sponsored by Red Bull, which is futsal, which is like a fast-paced game for football, and it attracts a lot of youngsters because of number of goals and how it's a close game. Can we expect like box cricket or indoor cricket to be part of such a global where the IPL teams also have like a box cricket, like a IP where you have like Shreyas Iyer's 5 and then the top 5 players from the box cricket plays, and it becomes a commercial property rather than just a hobby which we usually go and play as a turf game with our friends and stuff.
I mean, I joked about box cricket. I didn't know you took it seriously.
I wasn't there actually that time.
I don't know. Snehal, would you like to take that? Box cricket is something that I guess all of us have played at some stage in our lives. Do you see Snehal Pradhan 11 versus a Shreyas Iyer, Snehal Pradhan 5 versus Shreyas Iyer 5 at, I don't know, a ground somewhere in some compound in Bombay?
I don't know about the packaging of it and the franchising of it, but I certainly see these kinds of cricket as a great introductory vehicle for cricket to be taken to other countries, because it's just you talk. Tim was mentioning Brazil. I'm imagining, never been to Brazil, never been to South America, but I'm imagining it's a football crazy country. There must be so many of those futsal pitches, those small artificial turf pitches over there. I mean, have a box cricket tournament there. Such a great way to use the existing facilities of other sports to popularize your own sport. I'm all for that. I mean, I don't say that only hardball cricket is cricket. Any kind of cricket is cricket. I grew up playing cricket literally on the street outside my house. That is cricket for me, just as much as playing on Ranji Trophy grounds or international grounds.
Great. So we end the session with two revolutionary ideas. One for the purists, that is the test matches for franchisees, and the other for not people like me for sure is box cricket leagues. But we'll end with that. We have overshot the time limit already. Thank you all for patiently listening to us, and thank you all for joining the panelists. It's been brilliant. Thank you.